Hello and welcome to a video by FHS History Revision. As per usual, for any other history revision resources that you're interested in looking at, just head to our website. Tons of stuff on there, lots of different resources for exam technique, revision materials, past paper questions, etc. This is your website, so use it. What we're going to do today is we're going to have a look at the very first question of Paper 1, Section A, which is on America for us at Fairfield. And the question is always the same. It's read interpretations A and B from the interpretations booklet. And then it says, how does interpretation B differ from interpretation A about? And in this case, it's President Roosevelt's New Deal. Then finally, it says, explain your answer using interpretations A and B. And this is worth 4 marks. Just a few things to talk about before we get started. This is a 4-mark question, so you're looking to spend roughly 5 minutes answering this. So it's a very short answer, probably 1 paragraph. As a rule of thumb, for every 4 marks, you're looking for 1 substantiated point. Having a look at the question itself, the question is, how does interpretation B differ from interpretation A? And I just wanted to bring your attention to this word here, this word differ. So what the question is asking really is, how is interpretation B different from interpretation A? And finally, it always gives you a topic. So the topic here is President Roosevelt's New Deal. So what does interpretation B say? How is it different from what interpretation A says about the New Deal? Let's have a look at what the exam board says. It's always good to understand what the exam board is looking for. AQA, what they're looking for in a top answer is a developed analysis of interpretations to explain the differences based on their content. And again, I just want to draw your attention to this word here, content. So it's asking you to look at the content of the different interpretations, not the provenance, so not who wrote it or when it was written or why it was written, but the content, what actually is in the interpretation and what are the differences between those two. So let's have a look at how this might be set up in the interpretations booklet. You'll always get 2 very clearly labelled interpretations, and of course remember the first 3 questions in paper 1 are always about these interpretations. So you have a how do they differ, you have a why do they differ, so why do the authors have a different opinion, and then finally, which one is more convincing? So remember, we're having a look at question 1, which is how do the interpretations differ? And we always get interpretation A and some information about it. This is called the provenance. This is the background information. Then we have the interpretation itself, and then we have the same for B, so the provenance and then the interpretation. Now remember, in this question we're just using the content, so we don't actually need to use this first section, the provenance. So what I'm going to do to make it easier for us is I'm going to get rid of the provenance completely. We don't need to use it at all in this first question. So there we go, there's interpretation A and interpretation B, but with the provenance removed. What I would do at this point is I would take a few minutes, probably 2 minutes, 3 minutes maybe, just to read through interpretation A and interpretation B. And what I'm going to try and do in that time is I'm going to identify any key quotes that might really give an example of the message. So what quote could I use here to really show what this source or the interpretation is saying? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, maybe just pause the video, have a little look through the interpretations and pick out 1 or 2 key quotes from each interpretation that really show the message it's trying to give you. So if you want to pause the video, do so now. Okay, so you've had a chance to pause the video and have a look through the interpretations. I'm going to show you the kind of things that I would be pulling out of these different interpretations. So, interpretation A talks about how this man planned the demonstration of unemployed during Roosevelt's inauguration. That's his first speech. It also talks about how maybe he was chosen to open the demonstration, but he was arrested because he didn't have a permit. But really, we're looking for anything about the New Deal. Remember, this is all about President Roosevelt's New Deal. I'm just going to highlight that to make sure we remember it. And here he mentions here, listening to the broadcast when I was in jail, it did not sound exactly like a New Deal to me. And he mentions, I did not believe the president and had no confidence in him. He also talks about Roosevelt closing the banks. Remember, that was one of the first things that he did, was to close all of the banks in America. And it says that closing the banks and this introduction of the New Deal for the American people sounded like a possible dictatorship. So he's being very, very negative about the New Deal. He's saying that you can't trust the president, and he's also saying that it sounds like a dictatorship. We're going to do exactly the same now for interpretation B and pull out anything we think that might relate to Roosevelt's New Deal. And straight away he mentions that when Roosevelt died, American society was much further forward than when he became president. So he's very clearly suggesting that progress was made under Roosevelt. He also mentions that the New Deal helped those with the least power to bargain. And he uses words like lucky, so he says we are lucky people. If it had not been for this Democrat, remember he was from the Democrat Party, we might have fallen to a dictatorship. So again, two very different interpretations, and I'm just pulling out the key quotes from each one. Just an exam tip for you, try and remember to take a highlighter with you into the exam. Once you've highlighted the different interpretations, it's very easy to see the key aspects of each interpretation. So you don't have to keep reading it through. You can pick out the key bits and you've got them there. So let's have a little look now at how we want to go about answering this question. We want to show that we are aware of what interpretation A tells us and what interpretation B tells us. So I'd recommend starting off with phrases like interpretation A tells me this about the New Deal, or interpretation B tells me this. We also need to show our skills of analysis, so we want to make very clear points about their differences and then explain them, support them with evidence from the interpretations. Remember, it's looking for us to use the content to form our answer. So what does that actually look like? Well, let's have a go at answering this question together. So we've got interpretation A, we've got interpretation B. Remember, I'm just going to highlight some of the key features that we had highlighted before. So I'm just picking out again the couple of key bits. So closing the banks sounded like a possible dictatorship. And interpretation B, society was much further forward. We've also got that we are lucky people and that it helped those with the least power to bargain. And remember, 4 marks, 5 minutes, that's all we're looking for, 1 paragraph. So I'm going to start with the phrase interpretation B. Remember, it's asking for us to look at interpretation B first. How does it differ? Interpretation B tells me that. And I'm going to think, what does interpretation B tells me? Well, it tells me that the New Deal was a time of progress for American society, and that the American people were lucky to have Roosevelt and his New Deal. I'm trying to pick out direct things from the interpretations. He mentions they're lucky. He talks about society being much further forward, so I've used that word progress there to exemplify that. I'm now going to do exactly the same for interpretation B, or interpretation A, sorry, so the first interpretation. So I'm going to use the same phrase. Interpretation A tells me that, and I'm going to look here. So President Roosevelt, this person had no confidence in him. So I'm going to say A tells me that President Roosevelt was not trustworthy and that the New Deal, and it says here, sounded to me like a possible dictatorship. So I'm going to use that phrase. The New Deal sounded like a dictatorship. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to make a point about their differences, and I'm going to use direct words from the actual question. So how does interpretation B differ? So I'm going to use that phrase, interpretation B differs from interpretation A because it gives A. And interpretation B supports the New Deal, so I'm going to say it gives a supportive account of the New Deal, stating that the New Deal policies, and I'm going to use a quote now from the interpretation to really show the differences. And I'm going to use this quote here, it helped those with the least power to bargain. So I'm going to say it states that the New Deal policies, quote, helped those with the least power to bargain. I'm going to say and explain that quote a little bit, therefore supporting those in American society who had no power. I'm then going to also explain the differences. So I'm going to say this is different. It would help if I could spell. This is different to interpretation A's critical account of the New Deal that suggests that the closing of the banks, remember I'm using quotes again, closing of the banks sounded like a possible dictatorship. And there we go. I've talked about interpretation B, what it tells me, interpretation A, what it tells me. I've also made a really kind of clear point about their differences, and I've also explained those using the different quotes from the interpretation. Remember, it's just a 4-mark question, so we're looking for one paragraph, really some kind of points that have been built upon, explained really clearly, but quite a concise and short answer. And there we go, so there's question 1 answered. Thank you very much for watching today. As per usual, if you're looking for any other history resources, remember, go to our website, fhshistoryrevision.wordpress.com, and there'll be videos on questions 2 and questions 3 coming in the next few days as well. Thank you very much for watching.